Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this webinar on the EU's LGBTIQ+ Equality Strategy. I'm Susanne Oberhauser, the head of the European Parliament office in London. This is a further event in our series Parliaments in Dialogue, bringing together members of the European and the UK parliaments joined by experts and practitioners to discuss issues of common interest and common values. And one of these values is indeed reflected as we are today marking the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia, IDAHOBIT. I am very pleased that we have today on our panel Member of the European Parliament, Maria Walsh, Member of the House of Commons, John Nicholson, and international human rights lawyer, Jonathan Cooper. With them, we will be discussing the EU strategy on LGBTIQ+ equality, and whose actions include fighting discrimination, ensuring safety, protecting the rights of rainbow families, and LGBTIQ rights in the wider world. The discussion today will be moderated by Lucy Hannah, a producer, writer, and fellow at King's College London. I wish us all a very interesting and stimulating discussion and happy IDAHOBIT Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. And welcome to International IDAHOBIT Day. And as Suzanne said, we're discussing the first ever EU Equality Strategy for LGBTQI. When it was published last November, Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said of the strategy, "I will not rest when it comes to building a union of equality, where you can be who you are and love who you want, without fear of recrimination or discrimination." Easier said than done. This ambitious strategy has clear objectives and very targeted calls to action for member states to be achieved by 2025. However, we're 6 months in now, and with a continuing global pandemic, and many LGBTIQ people saying they feel more rather than less discrimination. Poland's president has branded LGBT+ rights more destructive than communism. And of course, post-Brexit, will the UK's commitment to equality regress? With me, as Suzanne said, virtually, to explore how the EU and our parliaments in particular are really in a position to change the situation, are MEP Maria Walsh, who's with us in Brussels, or from Brussels, a Fine Gael member of the European Parliament for Midlands North West since 2019. She's vice chair of the LGBTI Rights Intergroup, which advocates for equality in the EU and monitors member states' legislative initiatives. Her stances on policy and legislation align with her values of inclusion, equality and respect, even if this entails some difficult conversations with her European People's Party group colleagues. Welcome, Maria. And from Scotland is MP John Nicholson, a journalist, broadcaster and Scottish National Party politician. Since the 2019 general election, he's been the SNP Member of Parliament for Oakhill and South Perthshire. He's the SNP Shadow Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, and Deputy Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Global LGBT+ Rights. And last but not least, in Devon is Jonathan Cooper OBE, a QC barrister at Doughty Street Chambers in London. And he's been involved in many important LGBT+ human rights cases and in cases establishing equal treatment rights for trans people across the EU. He's assisted LGBT+ people in countries which criminalize homosexuality to bring legal challenges in Belize, Uganda and Jamaica, among others. And in 2011, he helped set up the Human Dignity Trust. We want to hear from you, the audience too, please. So post questions and comments on Facebook and YouTube during the conversation. But first, I'm going to ask each of our panel to respond briefly to the new strategy. Maria, I think at the time you referred to it as a significant stepping stone for many rainbow families living across Europe. So would you please start us off with your thoughts?
Indeed, and thank you, Lucy, and thank you to everybody. I just want to wish each and every one of you a good afternoon, and thanks for the invitation to engage with you all today. Not only is it important for me that we celebrate this important International Day as policymakers and LGBTI plus allies, but I'm also really grateful that we have the opportunity to continue cooperating with the United Kingdom on fundamental rights issues after their departure from the EU. And as the youngest Irish representative who represents a constituency just along the border of Northern Ireland, now's the time that we continue on this dialogue and keep the pace going. As you rightly pointed out, Lucy, the presentation of the first dedicated LGBTIQ plus equality strategy by the Commission was monumental for us, not just as members of the LGBTI intergroup who had campaigned for it, but as members of the community itself. And I'm a very proud LGBTQI ally, as well as a lesbian living in a very rural constituency. And it was an amazing moment to bear witness, to support, and to acknowledge and continue to ally in LGBTQI plus issues, not just on days like today, but every day, to make our communities more equal, fair, and full of opportunity. And it was great to see such a strong message of equality from the Commission. And as rightly you pointed out, Lucy, President von der Leyen said on its introduction, everyone should feel free to be who they are without fear or prosecution. Strong words, given the serious issues that LGBTQI equality members face, and we've seen in countries like Poland and Hungary, and growing in other pockets of our EU and worldwide. Backsliding on rainbow rights will not cease on its own, and we need to keep working together to fight for fair equality. Some good points to this strategy from my perspective. One being, last summer I hosted an event on the mental health impacts of COVID-19 on our LGBTQI community members. Specifically looking at mental health is one of my main areas as an MEP, and I believe in speaking with younger people right across the EU, not just in Ireland, it is one of the key points of having supports on the ground when they do want to discuss or acknowledge or work with their own family and friends about talking about their own orientation. I believe we need a cross-sectional approach to mental health, seeing it taking into consideration in all aspects of our policy making also. And the impacts that lockdown and the pandemic has had as a whole across our EU citizens was something that was overlooked last year, I believe. And I felt it was essential that we highlight the specific mental health issues that community members face and have continued to face with the lockdown. Therefore, I was really delighted that they are included in aspects of the strategy from the Commission. There's been numerous references to the protection of the mental health of our LGBTI plus community members, very much recognised in the strategy, as I shared, and as COVID-19 has compounded the issues they face in this regard, and I think that's a huge plus. One specific issue through the pandemic also was that the physical health access to our community members, particularly those who are transitioning, and it has been extremely and severely restricted to some people, and even having them denied access to healthcare throughout the pandemic due to their orientation. And for me, having these two aspects specifically called out in the Commission strategy is a huge gain for our community, for me and my work and my team's work, and again is a huge step forward and towards a cross-sectional approach to mental health issues and health overall that we need to face as policymakers. The strategy also takes note of the high amount of LGBTI plus community members who are homeless, and how this is something that we've seen growing across the EU. So it was fundamental that this was included in the strategy. Another area I'm very keen to address in my work and hear from other panelists today is the need to protect our LGBTI plus community members who are asylum seekers in reception centres and beyond, as they are part of a very vulnerable community which can be taken advantage of both travelling to the EU and when they arrive. And some very hesitant to come forward about their sexuality for fear of repercussions in their temporary accommodation, and something that we need to, again, work cross-sectionally and develop and really implement the strategy, that it doesn't remain just on the black and white sheet of a page, but is also and fundamentally protecting the citizens that most need it. A national and EU issue that I feel needs more addressing, and you mentioned it, Lucy, in your words, as did Susanna, was the family relations. We must be mutually recognised across the EU, something which is lacking even in the more LGBTI accepting EU countries and societies. If someone is recognised as a parent in one member state, they must be recognised as a parent in all member states. And I was delighted to see this so blatant in the text, as rainbow families are often openly discriminated against in many EU societies. And this is something that, not on a national front, but as an intergroup LGBTI within the Parliament, we're really honing in on post this strategy. To finalise my few words, I just want to say the UK has always been a great ally in the progression of LGBTI rights. For me, and as an Irish MEP, I recognise a huge work the UK has done in this vein, particularly when it comes to Northern Ireland and seeing fundamental and societal change there. I hope that we can continue to work on, learn from and rely on each other in our campaign for equality. And I would really like to see that emphasised, that our Parliament intergroup is always open and willing to engage. And just from a personal standpoint, in 73, we joined with the United Kingdom, and we, as a female, as a rainbow member, and as someone who believes the EU was a great catalyst of change in our country, it is because of the strong relationship that we have with the United Kingdom and its NGOs and stakeholders and citizens, and long may that continue. Thank you very much, Lucy.
Thank you, Maria. Just a quick question from me. What kind of equality bodies do the various member states have? I mean, you mentioned recognised across all states, but we know that, it's really the question about how do we translate this into reality? But can you just give us a sense of how easy, what level of challenge that is? Because I imagine it's huge.
Yeah, well, in terms of specific organisations that we in the Parliament work quite closely with, there's ILGA, there's a number of family organisations too. In terms of Ireland, we work quite closely with TENI, as well as Belong To, and a lot of youth organisations that are really just trying to highlight and make sure as policymakers that we're not just looking at the statistics and waiting for them to backslide further more, that we're actually storytelling and adding very emotive and very serious discrimination that is being felt and experienced by community members. Every day is a learning day, and it's a school day as a policymaker, I believe. And while I'm a Rainbow community member myself and have been involved in the community for many years, there's still fundamental and systemic discrimination across communities, and it's important that we work with the likes of ILGA, TENI, Belong To, and specific national and regional and local organisations on the ground, that we begin to really open up and look at the issues. And I will just say one thing that was an immense education point of view for me and my team was just months ago, we organised a virtual tour to Poland to speak with MPs, stakeholders and individuals involved in the Rainbow community, and to hear and see the amount of discrimination impact they're experiencing was unbelievable in 2021, just moments after the strategy had been launched. And we have such a powerful commissioner in Commissioner Doughty, as well as a president commission with Ursula von der Leyen. So it's, to your point, it's not just about one organisation, it's about all of us working together and calling out the issues that we're seeing and ensuring that there's no further backsliding. I hope I
Okay.
answered your question there for you, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks. And John Nicholson in Scotland, can we hear a few thoughts from you, please?
Yes, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to do this. And European Parliament office in London arranged this. I've been in association with you for many years, and I was so delighted after Brexit that you carried on, kept your office open. I've had many happy engagements with the office, and I confess actually though, when he wrote to me a while ago and asked me to be involved in IDAHOBIT, I thought for a second it might be a talking convention, so I was all ready to start talking about trolls. So it's good to know that it's lesbian and gay rights, something I know a fair bit about, having been the first ever network presenter at the BBC to come out as gay, which was in 2001, and it made all the front pages of the papers, which was quite extraordinary. Told me that I was the first person to come out as a network news presenter. Can you imagine? Nobody had ever come out until the 21st century. Extraordinary. Politics as a MP is relatively elected politics in 2015 as a member of Parliament from Scotland for the Scottish National Party, and that great wave of SNP MPs who are elected. And one of the things I was able to do at Westminster was introduce the Turing Bill, named after Alan Turing, the eponymous wartime hero. And the aim of the bill was to pardon gay men found guilty of crimes which are no longer on the statute book, because such a progressive country in so many ways. You've got to remember that it was the Blair government that fought very hard to prevent gay men and women from being accepted as members of the military, and you could be expelled from the military simply for being gay if they discovered that you were gay. And they went to the European Court in order to defend this ban, and one of many wonderful things that Europe did to overturn that ban on gay people serving in the military. Well, back to my Turing Bill, it received all party support, and so many, especially older gay men who perhaps had lived with a conviction because it was 21, they were 21 and their boyfriend was 20. They'd been caught perhaps in a hotel room, and the 21-year-old had been charged with having sex with a minor and has had that to live with for the whole of their blighted effect that had on so many people's lives. They could never travel to the United States, they could never be a teacher, there was all sorts of things they couldn't do. So I wanted the Turing Bill to grant them a pardon. Despite the fact that it had all party support by a Conservative Party member, filibustered, which meant that he talked for so long that the bill fell. Well, fortunately, it was then picked up by my own party's government in Edinburgh and passed with all party support. So in the UK, where in Scotland there exists this pardon, but south of the border in England, the pardon doesn't exist, sadly. You know, when we first arrived at Westminster, this group of MPs, because there were so many of us who were gay, a record number of lesbian and gay MPs, we were the largest LGBT parliamentary group in any party in the world. And our very gayness then made gayest parliament in the world. And that got some attention. And of course, things have got better for LGBT people in the United Kingdom, all the 4 countries of the United Kingdom. But sometimes I think we don't notice significant pockets where things aren't good for LGBT people. And I'm sure all of you will share my own concern about Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. This is a man who, apart from creating the Brexit, is known for a whole range of very homophobic comments in his past. He referred to gay people as bum boys in tank tops in one of his newspaper articles. Now, he would, of course, excuse himself by saying, well, I'm a politician now, I'm different. But I don't think it matters when you say those comments. It matters that you say those comments. And we've moved a long way, of course. But one of the things I think we're having to struggle with at the moment is a significant rise in, and I'm sure Jonathan will want to talk about this in a few moments. The UK, as you may know, has different legal systems in the different countries. So in the Scottish Parliament and in the UK Parliament, there's been an attempt to introduce the Gender Act reform. And this has caused a mountain of hate directed at trans people. It's most significant online, I suppose. It's an importation of the States where I think the religious right realise that they can no longer tackle gay people because gay marriage has been passed by the Supreme Court. So they've decided to pick on perhaps the most vulnerable group in society, and that is trans people. And they've imported this, spending vast amount of money, putting newspaper articles, just openly transphobic newspaper articles, in the national papers. And I've been very outspoken on this issue, attracting quite a lot of abuse myself online because of it. And I was delighted that the National Party has a clear commitment to Gender Recognition Act reform in our party's manifesto. And the SNP, as I'm sure you saw, was returned for a fourth consecutive term with a landslide victory, and will now enact form a fringe party which was very hostile to trans rights, and many thought might do well in the election, ended up with only 1.7% in the results, which I think shows us is that the ordinary, decent people are kind, and they want to see people live their best lives. And, you know, everybody's got gay brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, workmates. And I think certainly there's widespread support for liberal laws for LGBT people. And by many measures, Scotland is the most friendly place to be a lesbian or gay person in Europe, and pretty significant difference from when I was a kid, and very welcome. And we've touched on Brexit. I have to say, I hope that Scotland will soon be back with you all in the European Parliament country, and as a country which will continue to champion LGBT rights. It's certainly what my party wants to see, and I think what most Scots now want to see. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, John. How far did the UK have an input into this strategy before leaving the EU? Would there have been anything different if the UK was still a member state in terms of the strategy? Do you know?
I don't afraid definitively. What I do know is that I think all parties now, apart from the some of the Northern Irish parties, I think one specific Northern Irish party, I think all parties at Westminster are now pretty comprehensively pro lesbian and gay rights. And in fact, you mentioned in your introduction that I'm the deputy chair of the on International Lesbian and Gay Rights, and we've come up with this initiative, which is for each of us as members to pair with parliamentarians or others in countries which are hostile to lesbian and gay rights, and to try and get to people who might feel beleaguered in countries where they face persecution and worse. And that's an all-party initiative. The chair of the all-party group is a Conservative, and obviously I'm SNP is a Dem. To answer that question specifically, I think the Conservative government, and before that the Alliance government, had their mind on other things apart from LGBT rights, because the Conservatives obviously have been having a bit of a civil war over years, which has consumed the party and now hits us with the consequences all of us know.
Thank you. And last but my name is least, Jonathan Cooper, who's given me permission to introduce him as the bad fairy of the ball. So I shall let him put that into context. Jonathan.
Thank you, Lucy, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the Parliament in London for organising this very topical and relevant event. And it's an honour to be here with Maria and John, and to be chaired by Lucy. So, yeah, I am going to be the bad fairy at the ball, because I want to be rather critical of the strategy, if that's okay. I think the strategy is good in and of itself on one level, but it's far too late. If I was going to extend that kind of bad fairy metaphor, we have definitely been sleeping for far too long in the context of homophobia and transphobia and biphobia, and it's time that we were kissed, or somehow we need to wake up, and Europe needs to wake up to the daily abuse that LGBTQ people are subjected to. ILGA launched their map of Europe today, and looking at how bad it is, and that's the only way to look at it. You see how bad it is. Shocking, Maria, that Ireland barely gets over 50% of on the spectrum towards equality. The United Kingdom is there at 64%. The only country that is worth acknowledging is Malta, and congratulations to them. It's an abysmal state of affairs. It's appalling to see Italy at 22%. France and Germany are in the low 50s, as Ireland is, or 50+%. And it's just unacceptable that LGBTQ people live half lives. And it is the responsibility of the Union, and obviously of the United Kingdom separately, to really up our game. And the question is, why is that not happening? And of course, it's a good strategy on many levels. As Maria has pointed out, it ticks all the right boxes. But until we have comprehensive anti-discrimination protection across the European Union, or some acknowledgement that the definition of sex is so broad to include gender identity, sexual orientation as well as gender identity, this miserable state of affairs is going to continue. And I think the European Court of Human Rights also has to accept its own responsibility for this miserable state of affairs, because you can't have a little bit of equality. And what the European Court of Human Rights, the Council of Europe, has therefore been doing in their whole approach to equal marriage is to sort of foment inequality by the Strasbourg Court saying marriage doesn't have to be made available or the freedom to marry doesn't have to be made available to gay and lesbian couples, fundamentally then undermines equality and accepts inequality. And civil partnerships, even though they mandate civil partnerships are that classic separate but equal. And they're not equal, as we know. Separate but equal doesn't work. And so we really do need to up our game, and we rely on MEPs, MPs to be pushing this whole agenda much harder and much further. I mean, it is interesting. It was very nice to hear Maria say what a leadership role the United Kingdom has played in relation to LGBTQ plus equality. But actually, that's not really the case. at the point where the European Union was leading the way and led by MEPs, those brilliant MEPs, and the Commission as well, pushing equality, LGBT rights, getting sexual orientation included in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, ensuring that we got employment protection. At that point, the situation was the situation that John just described from his own perspective in Scotland. There was no more miserable place to be gay than the United Kingdom. But the interesting thing that happened with the UK is that they embraced the equality agenda that the EU had offered them. And the question, therefore, is why aren't other jurisdictions doing that? Why is there only, whatever it is, 57% of equality in Germany, 56% in France, 22% in Italy, 54% in Ireland? The idea that people still can't go to their healthcare professionals and just be gay or lesbian or trans is just unacceptable in the 21st century within the European Union. And so my call as the bad fairy at the ball is to say to the European Union, great strategy, good for you, nicely pulled together, ticks all the right boxes, but how are you going to give this teeth? I get that the strategy says we're going to call for equality commissions to include sexual orientation and gender identity as part of their remit, but we need much more than that. And the real place where we need it is it needs to be funding. No change happens without funding and resources. And you just look at the amount of money that is being poured into the anti-gender movements, the anti-LGBT movements, very much the anti-trans movements, and there is nothing coming the other way. There's still the same small few million quid that are being made available globally to LGBT rights globally, and yet there are tens of millions and millions of pounds being pumped into the anti-LGBT movements. And so we need the European Union to do more than just have this fine policy. We need the European Union to be pumping money into LGBT equality within the Union and outside. And the fact that Turkey is on 3% on the equality threshold, according to ILGA Europe, is just unacceptable. And the whole global question, are we really doing enough? Is the EU really doing enough? How did it happen that in Uganda in the 21st century they passed a sexual offences law just a few weeks ago that enhances and extends the criminalisation of intimacy between same-sex couples and includes trans people too? How did that happen? That's a fundamental failure of global democratic values. Where was the European Union? Why wasn't the EU saying this just isn't possible? You cannot do this in a 21st century world that is committed to democracy and to human rights. And so, in conclusion, a great policy, a good start. Way too late. Why did it take till 2020 to have such a strategy when MEPs have been calling for greater protection for LGBT people in order to fully recognise the European Union as a genuine free movement place? Why did it take 30 years for the Commission to finally adopt the strategy? We must accept that there will be resistance to it. But an interesting development happened in the UK yesterday. I have to agree with John and share his concerns about the UK's Prime Minister. But to the government's credit, yesterday they appointed Nick Herbert as a global envoy on LGBT rights, but looking at domestic issues as well as international issues. And now that he will be charged with that obligation on behalf of the UK government, we will have to see change, because otherwise he will be shamed and will end up looking foolish, as will the government. And so there may be something in that. Obviously, the EU has its brilliant special representative on human rights, but maybe the EU needs to go further and say we will have key people charged with this task, they will be held to account, and any failures on their part will be drawn to their attention. And so it's an interesting development, and it'll be interesting to see how Nick Kerber thrives in that role, and we can look forward to that. I do have to very quickly, again agreeing with John, just point out the dire situation for trans equality across the European Union, across Europe, and also in the United Kingdom. Whilst a particularly vulnerable group of people can be treated and denied equality in the way that they are, we're going to get nowhere. So I end my few minutes by calling for the European Union to have a greater critique of the Council of Europe and its approach. Marriage is the benchmark of equality, and denial of marriage is homophobic, and it needs to be stated as such. And those that deny marriage are homophobes, and that needs to be stated as such. The United Kingdom needs to develop a good, strong working relationship with the European Union in the promotion of global LGBT rights. And I think we are quite fortunate, therefore, that we have Nick Herbert now in position, who hopefully will work closely with the EU, pushing a strong global equality agenda. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jonathan. Maria, would you like to respond to Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm scribbling notes from John. I mean, from my perspective, I categorically agree with many of his points, but I just wanted to, absolutely, in terms of implementation, why did it take so long? My argument, or my agreement with the subtext of it didn't happen because it didn't happen, because there wasn't political will across the EU, the UK included in that at the time. I think countries are moving still in different speeds, and that certainly needs to change. But I certainly don't want to spend, and I hope we're all in agreement this time, talking about what should have happened, where we can actually focus on what's happening now and what we need to do going forward. I will just say, and just to Jonathan's point, and not to be combative, you know, my inclusion around being grateful to the United Kingdom, particularly from an Irish perspective, is the fact, sitting in the European Parliament, is the fact that, you know, many of my work in college around LGBTQI work had come through the foundations of Stonewall. My conversations with Lord Cashman in terms of why he and many other members started the LGBT intergroup here in the Parliament were fundamental in informing me what work still needs to happen even years on. So to the point in terms of from, again, an Irish perspective, you know, we have citizens in Ireland and across the EU that is still moving to London and in parts of Scotland and Wales and not so much Northern Ireland, but certainly London, to rid of, for generations, to live freely and openly and honestly. Why that happened in the first place? Well, it shouldn't have, but to my point just made there, we need to focus on what we're doing now to protect citizens also in the future. So just to add note to that, that's why I'm grateful. I don't think anybody is doing it well. I'm not surprised to hear. I haven't seen the map from ILGA yet, but I'm not surprised to hear Ireland is not high on that. While we, from a PR perspective, and seen waves of change from a very Catholic driven country in 2015 with marriage equality, we still do not have equality within our LGBTQI community in Ireland. Take to your point, and I agree with you, Jonathan, around and John, around our trans community members. It should not take the length of time it does in order to begin the process of transitioning, to have supports and resources. And I 100% and fundamentally agree with both, but in particular, because Jonathan mentioned it, around funding. Funding needs to be in place in terms of implementation. Resources need to be in place. We need to look at better education platforms, not just for younger people, but across all age demographics. And we need to also keep the pressure on around the anti-discrimination directive that has been held in the council for years, which will only support and aid LGBTQI community members across the EU and worldwide. And I agree around the serious change and the lack of motivation in countries like Uganda, Jonathan, that you had mentioned. Diplomacy couldn't come fast enough. And if we're going to put out statements and strategies like this in the European Union, then we need to make sure that we're not just writing on sheets of paper and leaving it to collect dust in a filing cabinet somewhere, that we need to actually put resources and funding and look at not just slapping, naming and shaming countries like Poland and Hungary and else that is reneging on the reasons why they signed up to the EU, but make sure that we're hitting their purse strings, because countries stand up to that and will change within that. But that's just my highlights for now, Lucy, and
Thank you.
Certainly not to be combative, because I agree with everything that was shared. I just wanted to say those few points.
Combat is good. Combat is good. We've just got a question from Richard Kirker, who says, who is best placed to act as catalyst to adopt a stronger reform agenda? And he's echoing Jonathan's stirring clarion call. Who is best placed to act as catalyst to adopt a stronger reform agenda? John, would you like to respond to that question?
Well, as always, it's a combination, isn't it? It's a combination of activists and journalists. I speak as a journalist, and politicians too. I agree with pretty much. Well, actually, I agree with everything that Jonathan had to say. I think one of the problems in Europe, and I speak as a very strong Europhile, is that there's too often an unwillingness to pull out politicians from other countries, because Europe is so large, the European Union is so large and unwieldy, isn't it, with 27 members. It's such a wonderful project, but to a large to act on consensus, doesn't it? And I would like to see much more robust language used about the rampant homophobes in Poland and Hungary, the appalling political leadership, and the sheer. I mean, I'm very happy to call out Boris Johnson for his bigotry when I see it. Obviously, I'm in a different party from him. But I don't think I see enough of that in European politics. I think there should be more naming, and young people should see that this is not a consensus position, that it's not cool to be a homophobe, and that their old angry politicians don't speak for the rest of us in middle youth. More robust engagement with the bigots would be very welcome.
Thank you. I was just wondering myself, actually, is there not a tension between wanting to expand the EU and the need for a fully liberal agenda? I mean, what if Turkey was on the point of joining, for example? I mean, what?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I mean, you'll have many people have forgotten that the reason that some of the countries moved to the European Union was because the United Kingdom, under successive governments, pushed very hard for it. And it was because they wanted to see a broadening of Europe rather than a deepening of Europe. And conservative politicians in particular, but some thought that the broader, more unwieldy Europe was, the harder it would be for it to become a deeper project, which they didn't want to see. And Germany for example, was very resistant to admitting some of the countries that they referred to as clubs. They didn't think that they had the human rights record, didn't think they had records on fighting corruption, but they also didn't think they had the social agenda and legal equality that Northern European countries had. And we were given all sorts of promises and assurance, for example, about what it would do as a member, promises that now have been broken. So I don't think there should be any question whatsoever of admitting Turkey as it currently stands, with it doesn't have a legal independent system, far-right homophobic politicians in government at the moment. Absolutely not. You should aspire to membership of the European Union, and you should have to meet a very precise set of criteria in order to join, not promises, but actually social achievements before you get in, because we mustn't make the mistakes we made in the past.
Do you want to respond to that before I ask you a question from the audience?
Me? Sorry, Lucy,
Yes.
I missed your top. Sorry,
I
didn't want to jump in.
you...
No, I didn't want to jump in ahead of Jonathan and really poke the bear, even though I welcome it and I kid with that. But no, I mean, I agree with John. For me, there's not a grey area when it comes to Turkey. If you're not willing to play ball and fundamentally protect your citizens, regardless of their orientation, creed, colour, mother tongue, it's irrelevant to me. If you're not willing to adhere to the founding values of the EU, I certainly would be quite outspoken about not allowing any country into the EU. But it doesn't certainly mean that we can turn our back to countries like Turkey. It means from a diplomatic and a democratic state that we look at working with grassroots and regional organizations who are pro-LGBTQI living in countries like Turkey, like I mentioned, speaking with organizations and MPs who believe in equality and fairness in Poland and Hungary to make sure that they feel like they still have a direct voice into representatives that might not necessarily be from their country, but certainly agree with the values of a European voice and a future that they want to be involved in. And I mean, not to make it too pro-Commission, because I think they do some things wrong too, as do the European Parliament. So I'm certainly not trying to give way here that I'm sitting on a fence with them. But I think the likes of the Future of Europe conference will play a major role in linking what John and Jonathan has shared there around calling out, naming and shaming, making sure the people's voices are feeling heard, and that, you know, if my constituents, which they do on a regular basis, particularly younger ones around LGBTQI, are seeing something across the EU and worldwide around LGBTQI rights that they want to see changed and me enacted in, that's my job. That's in my job spec to represent the interests and the wants in the future that the European Union will deliver for future generations. So within that, I'll just hand it back to you, Lucy. Thank you.
So Jonathan mentioned that marriage is the benchmark of equality. We have a question from Roland, who says in 6 member states of the EU, the same-sex civil union is not recognised by law. Does the strategy address this problem in any particular way? And I think it would be useful to ask, what are the particular problems thrown up by the non-recognition of same-sex marriage in some states?
Yeah, just to add there, I mean, there is an inclusion in the strategy. There's a reference to legal recognition legislation and encouraging member states, again, to opt into not using men and women within their legislation, but use the term gender and become not necessarily specific on 1 or 2 pronouns, but inclusive of all. In Ireland, I can say, while we have marriage equality, I made that point earlier, we certainly don't have equality around rainbow families, and there would still be some of our judicial representatives that would be quite biased towards having male-female marriages, and I agree with Jonathan's point in terms of being a cornerstone. But ultimately, again, this question is back to everybody here. outside of paving the way, outside of creating strategies, adding funding and resources, you know, and creating an open space of dialogue around what citizens want to see and go, and to John's point, naming and shaming countries that are not, then I'm a little bit at a loss as an LGBTQI representative and member of the community myself, how we can get this faster from present day and protect future generations.
You know, Jonathan, to what extent do legal protections actually result in improvements on the ground?
Well, can I just pick up on the marriage point for a moment? Sorry, Maria, but with the greatest of respect, I think that idea of legal recognition of partnerships or relationships isn't sufficient, and it builds into society the very discrimination that we're concerned about, i.e. so-called separate but equal. And therefore, you know, it is extraordinary that it took in the United Kingdom a Conservative Prime Minister to do this. But in order to get anywhere close to equality, you have to embrace marriage. And what if marriage is not there as the kind of the aspiration, at least, all kinds of discrimination can be justified.
Yeah, but not everybody aspires to be married.
No,
so how do we keep inclusive of those individuals too? You know,
sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, you know, I'm really not going to set the United Kingdom up as some kind of great model for all of this, but you know, the fact that civil partnerships are available to gay people and straight people, marriage is available to gay people and straight people, and then we obviously need other mechanisms as well to ensure that people feel comfortable and integrated and fully recognised by society. But I think it's whilst marriage is still excluded, or LGBT people are still excluded from marriage, there cannot be equality. And it can be, and it is the justification. And it is interesting, you know, it is from a European perspective, the problem is the Council of Europe. The problem is the European Court of Human Rights. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has made it absolutely clear that within the Inter-American human rights system, marriage is required. The Europeans pussyfoot around, kind of like, oh, got to be deferential, mustn't upset the horses. You know, what was it about the Inter-American Court that could just go straight in there and say marriage is fundamental, marriage is essential, and marriage is required. And so therefore LGBT equality in the Inter-American system is on a whole different trajectory than LGBT equality is in the Strasbourg system. But so I suppose that goes to your question, Lucy, about how important are these sort of legal safeguards. Well, they are, you know, you need them. You do need them. They're not the be-all and end-all, but in terms of kind of happiness and well-being and the mental health issues that Maria just so importantly raised, but without them, without that clear, full equality legally, we are in difficulties.
And actually, I think, Lucy, actually, I'm informed that actually 7 European countries, not 6, have constitutional bans on being Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Slovakia. So, as you can see, all the more recent members and all countries that passed some tighter tests before they were admitted. And actually, Turkey seems to have been backwards on LGBT rights because same-sex sexual activity was legalized in the Ottoman Empire in 1858. In England, it wasn't until 1967, and in Scotland, 1981 or 81. So yeah.
So what's the prognosis? Sorry, John.
I was just saying some of us are moving forward and others are moving backwards. But the rhetoric in some of the countries that I mentioned there seems to be getting ever more angry and ever more hostile. So the ground, as Jonathan refers to it, is clearly not working. I think we're being far too accommodating of bigots.
What do you think the prognosis is, each of you, for Eastern Europe, for example, Poland, Hungary, and the UK post-Brexit? And how will things look, do you think, if we're sitting here in 10 years' time? Jonathan?
Well, I mean, to be honest, Nick Herbert's appointment has been a game changer in the UK, and that only happened yesterday. And so it's exciting, and the opportunities are huge. And it's certainly something that if I was Maria, I would be looking closely at to see, you know, how do we get these kind of figures, these champions of LGBTQ plus equality, you know, making it real for the European Union. And I think he will make a difference. I mean, it'll be interesting how he engages with the trans issues in the UK. But I think on those sort of, what I would say, relatively easy stuff globally, I think he will make a difference, and he will give the UK a voice on these issues globally. And the European Union needs the same idea. I mean, you know, it should be there should be, you know, Maria should be given that job in the Parliament to be pushing for LGBT equality, and the Parliament knows that. And if Maria doesn't deliver the goods, she can be held to account. That's why they're quite useful, these figures. How we deal with those jurisdictions that John just named and listed, and we must shame them. We use economic power and the economic clout of the European Union. The whole point of the EU is that it makes everyone richer. We know that. And the United Kingdom is just about to experience what it feels like to not have that economic power behind you. And there needs to be clever ways of using that economic power to hold those jurisdictions to account. But they need to be excluded. They need to know that they're harming people, that they're hurting people, that they're causing. You know, there is no difference in racism and homophobia in the context of the recipient of racism and homophobia or anti-Semitism, and these people need to know that.
Maria, are there legal and policy things that ought to feature in the strategy 10 years from now?
Yeah, I mean, much to John and Jonathan's point there. I mean, you gotta hit folks who weigh a lot of their direction and their prosperity on funding from the EU, and that's one way to name and shame, but hit them where it fundamentally hurts also. I think the process around Article 7 works, but it's not working fast enough. So we continue to talk and then be political about it, making people come to the table. But when they're not moving fast enough, then we need to find other mechanisms to do it. I think a stronger blueprint to not just national parties, but local and regional organizations also need to be in place, so that, you know, in Poland, not all communities are LGBT or anti-LGBT, and we need to make sure we're not tarnishing or generalizing within that. I mean, again, from a national perspective, when the LGBT free zones came out of Poland, 2 years ago, communities in Ireland who twinned with certain communities in Poland had reached out and made sure either they're on the right page of equality or they're off, and if they're off, then they pull their twinning, and we need to ensure that the communities that are pro LGBTQI are also not being made accountable. But to pick up from John and Jonathan's points there, I mean, ultimately equality looks very different to very different people, but much to the points of what the President of the Commission shared in her State of the Union speech around, you know, me as a gay woman shouldn't have to be selective in an EU country that I want to live in because I'm fearful that my rights won't come with me from Ireland to any other country. And that's essentially where you come back to the legislation and the funding and making sure that if citizens are being held back to move freely and to prosper and feel the opportunities that the EU as a whole brings, then it can't just be economic value that the EU brings to communities. It also has to be the social and the humanitarian aspects too. And there, then, much to the points there, then we bring further change throughout the world.
Okay, thank you. And John, in 1 second, how's the UK looking in equality terms in 10 years' time?
As a broadcaster, I can't promise 1 second, but I can maybe do 1 second.
Well, you're going to have to try.
if I use semicolon. I'm a great believer in the recent history, post-war history of equality and LGBT rights shows us moving forward. I'm not optimistic about the UK in any shape or form post-Brexit. I think Brexit's very socially depressing as well and backward looking. But I am optimistic about Europe and indeed about Scotland's prospects within Europe, both for LGBT people and the rest of society.
Good. Nice positive note to end on, and we hope the dialogue will continue between parliaments and each other. Thanks to Maria Walsh, MEP, John Nicholson, MP, and Jonathan Cooper, QC, and thank you to the European Parliament liaison. Sorry, John? No.
I'm not a QC.
So, apologies. Thank you to the European Parliament in the UK for organising, and a reminder to look at their other events and exhibitions on their website. And there's one opening in reality today, which is photographs from the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, when Europeans rocked mostly naked, apparently. So we can all look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.